I think the challenge for us is not so focused in did we get it right, but are our hearts open to what it is that God is trying to teach us about himself?
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Purpose-Filled Money Podcast. We're your hosts, Courtney and Caleb Sams, and we're going to be continuing the conversation of what does it look like when you bridge the gap between faith and finances. If you haven't already, go back and listen to the first 3 episodes. We're setting the stage for this entire conversation in this first kind of section. And so, we're going to continue on. And what do we have today?
Yeah, I think today, as we think about these foundational systems that are going to form how we have this conversation, we're going to spend some time talking about a specific parable that Jesus offers in Matthew and navigating maybe what that parable is actually trying to ask its audience to do. We are going to try and fail to offer you up a version of that parable that we've kind of worked on that maybe fits our medium of finances a little more to the T. It is admittedly going to not be nearly as good, not even remotely as good as Jesus's parables. So give us some grace in that. But we want to talk through what this parable is, what it's for, what Jesus uses this parable for in Matthew 13, the parable of the sower or of the soils, and what we believe he's asking his audience to do. I think you'll find by the end of this episode that is something we must do regularly as we continue this conversation.
Yeah. So do you want to read the parable first, or do you want to explain on the front end what parables like this are used for?
Let's read the parable.
Okay.
And then we can kind of talk through it. I think it'll help people get in. Yeah. So I'm just going to really quickly read the first few verses of Matthew 13. You'll have probably heard this before. That same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat by the lake. Such large crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat in it while all the people stood on the shore. Then he told them many things in parables, saying, a farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow, but when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still other seed fell on good soil, where it produced a crop, 160 or 30 times what was sown. He who has ears, let him hear. And so we've got this parable that Jesus offers, and I think maybe in a little while we can go and read his explanation of this parable, because in this section of Matthew, Jesus is going parable after parable after parable, and at some point the disciples just go like, "Why are you teaching like this? Why are you using these parables?" And later they kind of ask him, "Can you explain the parable of the soils to us?" And what we want to, I think, talk through in this episode is, what is he trying to do with this parable? So we've got these 4 soils. You have the, I'm going to try and get them in the right order here. You've got the path that's untilled soil, then you've got the rocky soil, and then you've got the soil that has thorns around it that choke up the plants, and then you have the good soil. And what I think is really interesting here in this moment is that Jesus is using a really common rabbinic strategy here. Jesus is not the first rabbi that present 4 options to his students, his disciples, and basically asks them to think about, what are you? One of the most common ones used by rabbis back in the day, that you can actually find in different spots in the Talmud and the Mishnah and these recordings of these rabbinic conversations that we have, is this idea of this 4-part parable or teaching tool that's referred to almost as the 4 learners. And one of the ones we've looked at refers to the idea of the sponge, the funnel, the strainer, and the sieve. And it's this question that's asking the disciples, what kind of learner are you going to be? Are you going to be a sponge who takes everything in and keeps it all and is unable to really discern right from wrong? They just, anything they take, they soak it up. Or the funnel that takes in everything, but as it comes in, it goes out and they don't retain any of it. Or are you going to be like the strainer who in their thought process takes everything in, but only holds on to the bad stuff, and lets the good come out of it? Or are you going to be like the sieve that as it takes everything in, it's able to discern and only keep the good? And as rabbis would use these questions, these parables, these conversations on these 4 learners, the trick was really, the answer was evident. They'd present these 4, like, are you going to be this, this, or this? And the 4th one was always the right option. It was the right answer. So I think one of the things we do within parables is, in our culture, in our world, we're trying to figure out how to get it right. And the interesting thing about the way they have this set up is you'd never wonder what the right answer was. The point of the parable wasn't for you to get the answer right on which type of learner was best or which type of soil was best. Mm-hmm. The question itself made that abundantly clear. And if that's the case, then I think it makes us have to ask, okay, well then what's the point of this parable? What is it that Jesus here or rabbis before him are trying to get their students to do when they set up this kind of teaching point? And I think to figure that answer out, we might want to spend some time thinking through, what does it look like for God to test his followers?
This is one of my favorite things that I've learned in the last couple of years, because I am the world's hardest critic of myself. So what I've recently learned is, and this is something that's probably going to be very evident to a lot of people, but in Western culture, our culture, when we think of tests, we think of, what are those things called that students take now in school? Not aptitude tests. Where they're like...
It's been a long time since I've been in school.
Yes, I know. But like here in Tennessee, and I know in other ones, that you take these tests every single year, and kids get very anxious about them. Teachers are graded very harshly on them, and it'll come to me in a minute, but it's not here now. But it's this whole idea of just pass fail. Like you either have the answer right or you have the answer wrong. And it's just a very fat pass fail culture. I got really, really bad test anxiety when I was younger, because I was just always so scared of getting answers wrong. Where in the society of this Eastern culture, where you have, like, if you're looking at it through the lens of these parables, or if you're going back to the testing that God did for Israel as they were coming out of Egypt, it had less to do with pass fail and more to do as a gift that God got to see what was in your heart upon reflection and upon that testing. So you were entered into a test of God that God presented you, whether you liked it or not, whether it was a good test or bad, that doesn't matter. God presented you with an opportunity for you to show him exactly where you were. And the point of the test was for you to reflect see where you were, be open about that with God, and share that moment with God. And then he was going to give that gift to you of showing you where you were, and you were going to give that gift to him of reflecting on and owning where you were. Is that a good summarization?
Yeah, I think it speaks to this idea that what a rabbi is trying to do with his students is not give them an answer. It's trying to get them to think through, how did they get to the answer? The art of discovery becomes the most important thing, right? And we've seen this play out all throughout, history. You've got the constant classic saying of, if you give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day, but if you teach a man to fish, he'll eat for a lifetime, right? And it's this idea that a rabbi's goal with his disciples is not to give them all the right answers. And that's not to say that there isn't a time for correctness or error, but the goal is to teach his disciples how to determine correct answers and how to posture themselves well to wrestle with the text and to figure out what it is that's trying to go on. And in God's own way, within the testing that he gives the Israelites, it's that same moment. There's multiple tests that happen as they're leaving the Red Sea and headed to Mount Sinai. You've got three distinct ones. And the one that comes directly to my mind is this idea with the manna. And he goes, on the Sabbath day, you're not going to go out and collect it. And what you should do is take double your portion on that Friday to kind of collect enough for the next day, and you'll be prepared. Don't go out. Well, they go out anyway. And I think we would read it and go, they failed. They don't get it. Like, why are they wrong? Another test that happens is they're becoming thirsty. I think this might be the first one. They come to this spring is probably the wrong word, because it's not clean drinking water. And so they get to this moment where they wrestle with Moses, and they ask Moses, he asks God to perform this miracle. And I can't remember exactly. I think they throw some stuff into,
they throw a log into
the well. Yeah. To clean it. And it kind of describes this process that probably took hours and hours and hours, because they've got this small, just imagine the bottleneck of trying to get what is a group of people numbering in the millions to drink from this one
well.
option. And the way the text writes is as if they go across the next hill, and there is this oasis that God has prepared. And I think there are these moments where, as we read, especially looking back on our forefathers in the faith in Israel, and we go, how many times are they going to get it wrong? And I think the beauty and the grace of that situation isn't so much that they got it wrong. That wasn't necessarily the point. The point was God presented them an opportunity to show God where their hearts were, where their faith was. And in turn, based off of their response, action, whatever, they also were presented an opportunity to learn more about the heart of God. Mm-hmm. And that he was able to show them in that moment who he was, his provision, his grace, his protection, his promise, all these things. And the rabbis follow through with that Jesus' goal here is not to have you answer the question, which of these four soils is the best soil? He's not asking you, is it the path where all the seeds get carried away? Is it the rocky soil where the seeds can't take root and they don't grow, and as they sprout, the sun beats down on them? He's not asking you, is it the thorny soil that as the seed grows, that the plants are choked out and are unable to continue? The point of that question is simple. Obviously, the good soil is the right answer, where the seed takes root and the plants produce returns. What Jesus is asking his audience to do, and what he's asking us to do in this moment, as he's about to go into parable after parable after parable here in the book of Matthew, is he's asking his audience, what kind of heart do you have today? As you're about to go into this spot of learning through these parables, what kind of heart do you have? And the reality of that situation is the right answer isn't always the honest answer. We'd all like to say that, oh, right now in this stage of life, I've got the good soil. I'm ready for the seed of truth in the word to be planted in my heart, and it's going to grow and it's going to produce. But I think if we were honest with ourselves, we'd look around and go, I don't know if my life is exactly defined by good soil, at least not entirely all the time at every opportunity. That there are points in time where we recognize that maybe it is the worries and affairs of the world that are choking out what that soil, what that seed is trying to produce. Or maybe my heart isn't ready. It's not prepared. It's not open. And the seed doesn't even have a shot at growing in me. Or maybe I'm just not in a spot where it's able to take deep root. And I think the reality is we all probably cycle through these spaces in our life. And maybe hopefully as we continue to walk and mature, that we're spending more and more and more time in a prepared state. But as Jesus does in this parable, as he asks his audience, I think it makes sense to reflect and pause and think about where you are. What we want to do and why we think this is a foundational piece of our conversation is we're talking about faith and finances and bridging the gap. And gap, I like the language of bridging the gap. I think it rolls off the tongue. I understand we've talked a little bit about cracks and fissures and things of that nature. And I don't know if we're doing justice the chasm that we experience in our lives between faith and finances that are evident in the world, they're evident in our lives. In some degree, they're evident in our churches. And for us to have this conversation effectively, and by us, I mean you and me and any of you listening, it's going to take regular, honest reflection of where am I actually at? What is the way that I'm interacting with money in my life? What is the way that I'm using this tool? Or what is the way that I'm bowing down to this tool? Or what is the way that I'm letting money become something that serves me as I continue trying to work in the kingdom, or something that I'm turning and serving and it's become my master? I think we're going to have to regularly self-reflect on where are we? Because this is a journey that will last a lifetime, that as we navigate with finances and how they become an expression of our faith, the idea that we regularly have to reflect and look inward to go, okay, what is it that we're doing now? And how do we fix or seek to get closer to the image of God in the person of Christ? I think that's something that we believe to be foundational.
Hey everyone, this is Courtney. I just wanted to pop in here real quick and just let you know that in addition to working with households on finances, we also work with churches and congregations and offer stuff like seminars on topics like generosity, aging parents, and we'll work with parents on teaching kids about generosity and stuff like that. So if you're interested and if you want to talk more or learn more about what we do, our contact information will be in the show notes and you can reach out if you like. Enjoy the rest of the podcast.
So, without a good fancy transition or anything, we've written a parable, and it probably still has some work to done. Maybe it's better to say we are writing a parable, that we hope takes this idea of the four learners, the four soils, and kind of just puts it a little more in context of stuff and money. But without further ado, here's the parable of the shopkeeper.
Yep, the parable of the shopkeeper. There was once a shopkeeper who looked out and saw 4 people asking for food at the street corner. So he decided that the best way he could help them was to give them all the materials they need in order to bake bread for themselves and their families. He equally gave them the most expensive flour, the best yeast, and sugar he had in stock. The first person received the gift and used it to build an empire. He swapped the expensive supplies for cheaper ones, baked as much bread as possible, and sold it door to door for maximum profit. His success led him to buy a storefront next to the Shopkeepers with the goal of having a location in every city and town. The second person received the gift and went home and made all of the bread. He ate until he was full, and the rest of the bread went stale and was no longer good to eat. He returned back to the corner within a few days when he got hungry. The third person took the supplies, walked around the corner, and threw them in the dumpster. They had no need for flour that was nice or the expensive brand of yeast. They believed God would provide fully baked bread to them in his own time. The fourth person received a gift, used some to bake bread for his family, and shared some with neighbors. He saved the rest for later. Their praise led him to start a bread stand. Each morning he gave away some loaves before opening his stand. The shopkeeper noticed and offered him a dedicated space inside his shop to bake and sell bread while continuing his charitable efforts. And that is the parable of the shopkeeper.
Yeah. And, you know, we're going to put this in, we'll put this in the show notes. We'll put the words, you know, so that sometimes it might be hard to hear, and to stay fully focused, but I would ask that you reflect on this thought, within the vein of understanding that, again, we're not Jesus. We're not rabbis.
We're not rabbis. We're not.
But the question is, it isn't which one of these guys gets it right. Mm-hmm. It is more, where am I today? As I think about this foundational truth that God owns everything, that anything that I've got, anything that I've been given, anything that I feel like I've earned, anything that I've won, ultimately comes directly from Him. And what I do with that means everything. And admittedly, often I get it wrong. What I do with it, the posture in which I do it, the purpose behind why I do it, who it impacts or doesn't impact. And as we seek to continue this conversation, I think it is impossible to do so if we come to it thinking we've got all the right answers. Because I think the head space that allows me to even think about right or wrong answers is maybe on some level missing the point entirely. What I think is important as we are having this conversation is, if we're seeking to bridge the gap between faith and finances, and as this conversation continues beyond these fundamental foundational beliefs that Courtney and I hold that make this conversation move, you know, that we kind of come back to these hopefully on a regular basis because of this is true. If all we're doing here, whether it's all Courtney and I are doing here or all you're looking for from this podcast, is how to do this thing the right way. And if you're looking for the step system that allows you to figure out, if you do A, B, C, D in that order, your life is going to come into alignment and you're going to have your finances on the right track, and you are going to regularly get out of debt and save enough money for retirement and give enough money to charity and to church and back to God and all that kind of stuff. Like, if you're looking for the formula to figure out how to get it right so that you can officially bridge the gap between faith and finances, I think we've missed the point of what it is that Jesus is trying to show us in Matthew 13, that God is trying to show the people of Israel as they walk to Mount Sinai. And as we seek to walk towards the mountain of God, I think the challenge for us is not so focused in did we get it right, but are our hearts open to what it is that God is trying to teach us about himself? Are our hearts honest about where we are in our lives, in our families, in our careers, in our mastery or complete blundering of the possessions and finances and money and things that God has given us? Are we regularly open to reflecting in where is it that God has me today? And recognizing that, yes, there's going to be a point in time where, correctness and error come up and they're important. But that for the point of this conversation, it might be more important to hold to the truth that God is trying to teach us more about himself. And in teaching us about himself, teach us about ourselves in his image. And I think that's what we're trying to show today, is that while I think we're going to try and give you guys some, we call it tactical stuff, right? Where we might come to conversations and questions about how do you do this thing, or what does this thing mean or look like, and all that kind of stuff. And we'll get into that. Ultimately, the foundational truth that's represented in this episode is this conversation has more to do about who God is. And what does that mean in our lives?
Mm-hmm. And it's parables like this, the testing, like why I thought it was really important to talk about what does testing mean? Like when God says that he tested the Israelites and he's testing whatever it is, it's not a test that we think of. He's not putting a piece of paper down in front of you and telling you to check the right answers. That's why the question of the parable wasn't which is the best soil. It was which one are you? It's not something that is meant to bring shame. It's not something that's meant to make you look at someone else and think they're doing it better or worse than you. It's not a tool of judgment for someone else. So what we would like for you to do, and we talked about this today, we want this to be a conversation that you have, not just personally and not just a conversation that you maybe start having with God about where am I, but as a family unit, and even like with whatever circle that you're in, that you feel that you have the liberty and the space to have this conversation is reading the parable that we've written, reading the parable of the soils even, but in a financial space, reading the parable of the shopkeep, reflecting on where you think each person might be and where you might see yourself. And so maybe find some time to have that conversation this week with someone that you trust and someone that can have that reciprocating conversation back.
Yeah. Yeah, and just I would say just be open, seek out, pray, just like yearn for God to continue to show us more about who He is. We wrestled with like, should we maybe give you the behind the scenes on what we're thinking with this parable, and I think maybe one day we will, from our point of view. And again, not to say that it's the right answer. But I think for today, we want to leave you with a little more like mystery of like what questions arise when you interact with these thoughts. What do you think about these different people and their response, their action? I think there's value. You can find some good in each of them, which is I hope challenging. We're grateful that you're here in episode 4. And we hope that you have enjoyed this. We look forward to this community continuing to grow and hopefully to serve you well. If you ever want to reach out, ask us a question or anything, feel free to find us in our contact info in the show notes. And we will see you again next time as we continue this conversation.
Yep. Bye, guys.
Bye.